Welcome to my mini lecture on Craig Santos Perez's The Age of Plastic, which you can find in our textbook, Big Energy Poets, pages 164 to 166. Perez grew up in a bilingual home in Guam, and at the age of 15, he moved with his family to California. And as he explained in an interview, poetry was essential to keeping the language and the culture that he left behind with him. As he says, quote, poetry became a way for me to stay connected to memories of home and a space where I could learn and write about my cultural history. The title of this poem, The Age of Plastic, helps us rethink history. The title acts as a form of periodization, right? There's so many ways we could think about the present and so many different ways that historians and cultural critics periodize the present, right? That we live in the age of the cell phone or the age of mass media or the age of mass consumption. But Perez wants to challenge us to think about modernity as the age of plastic, that plastic becomes the defining commodity um, in which to understand how profound the transformations are around us and the profound transformations in our relationship to nature and our destruction of nature. Looking at the poem, it should be evident that it's divided into 7 different stanzas. What's surprising is the titles of each stanza. Stanza 1 is entitled Polyethylene, stanza 2, High Density Polyethylene, stanza 3, Polyvinyl Chloride, PVS, and so forth. And these are very jarring titles. A different way to ask the same question is, does poetry live within plastic? Or are these two formations, plastic and poetry, these two different media, are they antithetical to each other? One question to consider while you're writing this week's reflection or just thinking about the poetry is the order of these sonnets, specifically the way that these different plastics are organized. Why does it go from polyethylene to high density polyethylene? And you'll see that this poetry ends with the 7th stanza entitled Other. What is this progression from polyethylene to other, this world of otherness? So let's look at some of the stanzas together, this very beautiful, heartbreaking, profound poem. Stanza 1, Polyethylene. The doctor presses the plastic probe onto my wife's belly. Ultrasound waves pulse between fluid, tissue, and bones, echoing into an embryo of hope. Plastic makes this possible. A few things to highlight or foreground as you think about this poetry as a whole. First, wonderful use of alliteration. You have the P sound in presses, plastic, probe. Another aspect is the water imagery. As we move inside of the speaker's wife's belly with the waves pulsing, and again, pulse, we hear that echo with plastic and probe. And we'll see, you should see how the water imagery transforms as this poem progresses. And the final thing to highlight, there's so much to highlight, is that initially every stanza is going to end not with the poet's voice, but the voice of the dominant culture. Plastic makes this possible. And it's interesting, right, that the speaker's voice is usurped or drowned out, to use a water metaphor, by this dominant culture that insists that plastic makes our world better and, in fact, enables our world, right? Plastic makes this possible. So, thematically, very quickly, which we see is that for all the ways we might want to negate plastic or shun plastic or decry plastic, plastic surrounds us, enables our life. And in fact, in the scene, um, the most intimate, one of the most intimate moments that the speaker has in his life. One could imagine seeing his unborn child in his wife's belly. This is made possible because of plastic products. As we move to stanza two, we see something that becomes one of the aesthetic signatures of eco poetry, the shift of scales. We move from a space of intimacy in a doctor's office with the speaker and his wife and their gestating unborn child into a meditation about the larger world. And this world is rendered in a series of images. Stanza two, entitled High Density Polyethylene. Plastic keeps food fresh, delivers medication, clean water, forms cables and clothes, ropes and notes, even stops bullets. Plastic is the perfect creation because it never dies. Again, we hear the alliteration, clean, cables, clothes. We see the imagery of water, beginning with the second line, right? That delivers medications, clean water. And third, we see again that Perez's voice is swallowed by the dominant culture. The last two lines, plastic is the perfect creation because it never dies, doesn't emanate from the poet, but it comes from the larger world, a discourse that people assume as a type of common sense. And this dominant discourse drowns out, to use a water metaphor, Perez's voice. Plastic is the perfect creation because it never dies. And in these last two lines of the second stanza, Perez is introducing the theme, the complex theme of immortality and mortality, which will dialectically play out over the course of the poem's 7 stanzas, concluding in other. In contrast to the natural world, the web of life, we all die, decompose, and recompose and regenerate in different forms, but dying is a part of life. All living things die. But in the 20th century, our scientific technological modernity created this new chemical creation, this new chemical Frankenstein that has given birth to our modern world, right? It's everywhere. Plastic, and plastic doesn't die, it's immortal, and it's a poison, something that Perez will make clear as he continues to widen his scale and eventually in stanza 4 reach the oceans. Stanza 4 is entitled Low Density Polyethylene, reads, in the ocean there exists 3 tons of fish for every 1 ton of plastic. Leaches estrogenic and toxic chemicals, disrupts hormonal and endocrine systems. 8 million tons of discarded plastic swim into the sea every year, causes cancer, infertility, and miscarriage, multiples into smaller pieces. Plankton, shrimp, fish, whales, and birds confuse plastic with food, absorbs poison. Will plastic make the impossible? So many rich ideas to think about and scary ideas. And I think in stanza 4, again, I love how the water imagery keeps on expanding, and now we're in the ocean. But it, I think, broaches the topic of regimes of visibility and invisibility, and all the poison that the age of plastic creates, these poisons we don't see, the poisons within our body, and the poisons that are destroying our global oceans, as this stanza highlights all these different marine species in life absorbing the poison which is plastic. And again, we get this contradiction, right? On one hand, plastic enables our life, but it's also destroying our life. And the stanza ends, and again, this is Perez's voice, not a quote. Will plastic make life impossible? That's very powerful, right? Again, to say it again, it's very dialectical. The same artificial commodity and substance that enables our world is also destroying the world and taking a longer view, shifting our scope and scale. Perez is asking the question, is the end of the age of plastic the end of life as we know it? Skipping ahead to the final stanza entitled Other, and again, I hope students, or all of us, reflect how do we get this journey into otherness? Imagine being plastic, how empty it must feel, surrounded and used by us, imperfect, decomposing things. Imagine the migration into the Pacific Gyre, finally arriving to a patch of paradise belonging among its kin. Um, in this final stanza, Perez takes this imaginative leap, and again, we see the verb imagine beginning this stanza, um, asking the reader, inviting the reader to imagine being plastic, to take the perspective of plastic, to take the perspective of this otherness, um, and how empty it must feel, surrounded and used by us. And from the perspective of plastic, we seem imperfect, decomposing things. So to flip this around, in one sense, plastic is perfect, right? And it does not decompose. But that's its curse, right? That's what's destroying the world. And I love that it's only in this stanza that we see enjambment. We see words broken apart because of the ends of lines, right? Surrounded is broken up, right? That's enjambment. Surrounded, decomposing. It's a lot to think about on its own. And the very last stanza, which doesn't have a title, which is absolutely heartbreaking. I pressed the plastic nipple of the warmed bottle to my daughter's small lips. For a moment, I wish she was made of plastic, so that she too will survive our wasteful hands, so that she too will have a great future. I find this last stanza so powerful and moving. This is one of my favorite contemporary poems. Um, the poem ends where it begins, in a sense, returning to an intimate setting, but not the doctor's office, but what I imagine to be the speaker's domestic space. But although the doctor's office and the domestic space might seem opposed, they're similar, that they're both spaces of plastic. In every object, in every line, plastic is mentioned, from the plastic nipple, that's of the warm bottle, plastics in every line of every stanza in this poem. But the speaker's wish that his daughter was made of plastic, because in this world of destruction we're creating, because of our commitment to plastic, the only way he knows his daughter's going to have a future, a great future, is if she too is made of plastic, because he's giving her over and onto a world of death. So some final thoughts before everyone writes their reflection. The Age of Plastic exemplifies the criticism we've been reading on the Anthropocene or Capitalocene, depending on which periodization you prefer. The underlining ideology, the organizing binary of society and nature, right? As if society is something distinct and separate from nature. And again, this ideological foundation allows us to think we can control the world and control nature as an object, as a resource, just for our use, right? This is the world of plastic, but it's a world of death that we don't fully see. So final thoughts, if you turn to Perez's Poetics, which is given to us on page 167, I just want to read the first two lines. Ecopoetics is the study of poetry written about the natural world, environmental justice, ecology, and climate change. Beyond subject matter, ecopoetics also examines ecopoetry for how formal elements might embody ecological concepts, transformations, or aesthetics. For those that want to think more deeply about the poem, I think these two lines are just so interesting to think about, that ecopoetics is not just about the named subject matter or theme of plastic, but also the poetics becomes an examination of how formal elements, the organization of the poem, the way lines are organized, how they might embody ecological concepts, transformations, or aesthetics. And I think I would just, if I were to write upon this, if I was a student, I'd want to think more deeply about, again, not just the stated theme, but how the formal elements of this poem embody these ecological concepts and these transformations. Can you write about the line breaks, or the way the lines are organized, or the way the imagery is organized, or how rhyme works, right? When we hear alliteration and when we don't, and how do those formal choices, how do those embody ecological concepts and transformations? I look forward to reading your reflections, and thanks for listening to this mini